Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another show of Inspirate, the show that's here to inspire you, to empower you, to enlighten you. And we're running the series around a socio-economic paradigm, ushering in a new socio-economic paradigm, if it is at all possible. We know we have been ravaged by this pandemic, COVID-19, which has messed with every facet of our life. Can we live a normal life like we did before COVID? I don't think so. Somehow, when I reflect on COVID, we see it as a gift in some way, a lesson to be able to reflect, ponder, and to be able to usher in a better world, inshallah. In studio, we have two esteemed guests. We have Rahim Kumani, a businessman, a philanthropist, a person who does a lot of work in terms of community, as well as a social activist, someone who was very involved in student activism, who's still studying, Rashad Dadu. The name Dadu has got very synonymous in terms of our political history. And what we want to be speaking about today, we've had a number of guests that have spoken, from economists and so on, but we want to listen to the voice of the youth. We want to be understanding how they have deciphered this pandemic and how it has impacted their lives. Rahim, I'll start off with you, right? Can we usher in a better life for our people? We know with COVID what it's brought to us. We've seen this income inequality, the job losses, the heartache people are suffering with. Can we usher in something new?
Yeah, assalamu alaikum wa
Alaikum
rahmatullah. Yeah, there is a possibility because every challenge brings its own, way of living. It's the new normal, they call it. So COVID has brought a lot of lessons. Like we were able to connect better with our families. We were able to do business in a different way. We were able to save up a bit. We were able to be careful in everything that we are doing. So definitely, post-COVID, we will be having an aligned behavioral pattern, whether it's from the business aspect or a personal aspect. We will have a very aligned this thing. Even there were some people were telling me that, you know what, from now on we'll start valuing things that we've always just overlooked, such as traveling.
Yes.
Borders are closed, everybody's complaining, such as family. Some people didn't even know much about their family members, but when the lockdown happened, they started sitting with families and talking to their families now. So it definitely, we will usher in a new reality,
So we definitely are able to be coming up with some new design in terms of our socio-economic perspective.
Yeah, because you see, it was only in the past, before the COVID, it was only favorable to a few. But now we have seen that the same people that it doesn't benefit, they all somehow also come back to those who are benefiting. Like, for an example, we've seen during COVID the type of strikes that were happening, the lootings and all of this that were happening in many other communities. It was happening. But from that, we see that these people were not taking because of greed, but rather they were taking because of need. Then you look at the aspect of business as well. When COVID happened, a lot of like your filmmakers, your some industries, your entertainment industry, and it was really collapsing, right? So they were able to be creative and do things online and all of that. So yeah, so it's a new reality that we are ushering into, and we have to embrace it. This thing has permanently changed how we live.
Yes, what I'm hearing a lot of is this having to be innovative.
Yes.
Having to think differently.
Yeah.
Rashad, on your perspective?
Look, I think it's definitely ushered in a lot of new or disrupted our old ways of conceptualizing things, and various things. From my personal perspective at a university level and what it means for the youth, I think that it's had, the last 6 months have had drastic shifts in what we are used to, what we considered as normal, and now, as you so rightly said, what we need to adjust to. And I think that, there are particular challenges that youth face, and I think it's not limited to youth in South Africa, I think youth across the world. But I think youth are also resilient. I would like to believe so. And I think that as these new challenges come up, based on this new normal that we kind of have to adjust to, the youth in South Africa will show that resilience in terms of academics, in terms of employment, in terms of the political sphere, cultural sphere, sporting sphere. So in that way, I kind of am hopeful, but there are significant challenges that will take time to adjust.
On that point, I mean, before we even get to, and I think as humans we like to get to some solutions and, what they call the silver bullet, hoping that the problems go away. But I think it's important to understand, before we even get to the solutions, is to understand what the challenges are, as you mentioned. And I know from your perspective, Rahim, you are doing a lot of wonderful work, alhamdulillah, in the communities, especially in the Winterveld area, which is like in near Pretoria. Pretoria North, yeah. So with that, I mean, since COVID, from a social perspective, from an economic perspective, I mean, we're hearing some of the figures, right?
Yeah.
The youth unemployment, the general unemployment, right? Impact. What are some of the challenges that our people are suffering with? And I say general, the youth as well as just our people.
Yeah, the COVID situation really hit a very deep dent into our communities. Like, I'll talk specifically on the communities that I've been servicing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made sure that I service those communities.
Ameen.
Now, we have child-headed households,
Right.
that we had to take care of. We have
So
elderly people.
just I want to understand, this is children that are leading the homes?
Yes, I'm talking 17-year-olds, 16-year-olds. The parents pass away because of maybe, HIV and AIDS, Then after that, the firstborn has to take over the family. So, they have to provide for their other siblings.
And this is probably quite unique to our South African situation, more so than maybe other parts of the world.
No, but there's a lot. There's a lot of child-headed households. Currently, we're servicing about 17 of them in Winterveld at our community center at our masjid. And we have elderly people who are living with children and grandchildren also. Sometimes the grant or pension, it's not enough, to support, children and grandchildren. And also we have unemployed youth, which they are mostly frustrated. It's really frustrating that you don't have money to move, you don't have money to do things, So we've implemented a program where we call it an economic strengthening program.
Okay.
Whereby we try to gather the unemployed youth and try to give them some sort of training. And also we try and conscientize them on the reality of the fourth industrial revolution, because we're all going there. Like employment and all of this is all changing now. People are going to start working from home and all of. So we're preparing the youth on that. And then also we're doing career guidance. So there's certain careers that are slowly fading away.
Of course.
Due to technology. And so we conscientize them on that. So that's what we do on our part. And then we try by all means to make sure that, the people who are doing small businesses in the community, whether it's a car wash, whether it's a stalagis. You know what is a stalagis?
No.
Stalagis is where you sell zimbas, chips,
Right. Okay, yeah.
So we make sure.
The ladies that have got their tables.
Yes, the table is selling.
Yeah.
So we try and make sure that, if this person has that business now, we make sure that in a year or 6 months or so, he has another one so that he can open space and put another one.
Okay.
Even in car washes also. If the guys are washing, is 5 of them, we make sure that in the next 6 months, they all have their own car washes so that others also can occupy the space. So that's the type of solutions that we're coming up with. But in reality, poverty is real in South Africa. I mean, you've seen the statistics, 1 in 5 sleep hungry in the country. So it's a reality that all of us have to come in and somehow try and find solutions for it. I mean, holistic solutions, It goes down to behavior as well. Because there's some people that they want jobs, they just want jobs. After that, when they get to their working space, you find that they don't have the right akhlaq for the job, We need the education as well. And all of that also, you need to feed them in the process. So it's a whole process that, you can't just say, no, I'm empowering them, I'm educating them, and I'm helping them start up businesses, and then you don't feed them day to day. They're going to take that business money and eat first before they come to classrooms or yeah.
Especially this generation, right?
Yeah.
The younger generation, what they call the millennials.
Yes.
Generation Y, I think is a term for them as well. Right, is a generation that is looking for instant gratification.
Yes.
Which is different from what we taught in other generations, right?
Yeah.
You know, that element. And I guess maybe it's the technology that is allowed for that. But, you know, you're speaking of some of the challenges.
Yeah.
And we'll get to, I mean, there's some amazing work that you're doing. And we'll get to some, how we can even replicate that into other communities.
Yeah.
But just let's just focus on the challenges.
Yeah.
With regards challenges from your perspective, Rashad, what are you seeing, you know, from your lens in terms of some of the challenges?
So, I think, look, prior to the COVID-19 initial sort of onslaught and the lockdown regulations and things, Statistics SA's most recent quarterly labour report positioned the youth in South Africa as the most vulnerable in the South African labour market. The scary part for me about that is that this was before the drastic impact that COVID-19 had on the economy. This was published in February. And it kind of brings this quotation to mind. It's when, I hope I don't mess it up, but when the aristocracy gets the flu, the proletariat or the working class gets pneumonia. And I think there's a kind of historical precedent. We can look at the 2008 economic crisis, when these massive multinational corporations and things face this form of economic strife. It's always the most vulnerable. It's always the working class and the poor who are made to suffer, who are pushed further into the margins of society. And in our South African context, that's young African women in particular, who form the most vulnerable group of society. And because of this lack of employment, it creates a plethora of other social and sociological issues. You know, Brother Ree mentioned that people need to eat, and I think that's, you know, something that's in a way sometimes overlooked, in that a neoliberal capitalist society doesn't cater for the need for basic expressions of human dignity in all people. And when you place people on the margins of society, when you ostracize people, then you have a whole lot of knock-on effects. And some of them are social, but some of them are personal. A lot of psychological effects on people who are struggling to find employment. I know amongst youth, emotionally coping is something that could often be challenging. And I think that all of these things feed into this greater issue of being vulnerable in a society that doesn't necessarily cater for the most vulnerable.
So there we have it. We've been talking some of the challenges that the youth are facing. We understanding that the problem is a holistic problem. There needs to be, yes, practical dynamics that has to be undertaken. And Brother Rahim is doing that. We'd like to understand more about the initiative and where it started and how, and you know, some of the interventions which maybe other communities can also embark upon. So immediately after the break, we'll get to an understanding of some of the practical interventions. See you after the break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the second segment of Inspirate. We're talking the youth and specifically the issues facing the youth. We have two wonderful guests in studio. We started off with some wonderful conversation around some of the challenges the youth are facing. Brother Rahim Nkumani, who is the Sheikh at the Winterveld Jama'ah, just north of Pretoria. And Brother Rahim was talking about some of the interventions that they've undertaken at Winterveld. I know Brother Rahim was saying that he grew up in Winterveld.
Yeah.
And I guess you now wanting to give back to the community where you hailed from.
Yes.
And be aspirational, right, for people in that community.
Yeah.
So he was talking about not just I guess a place of prayer. No, it's more than that.
Yeah.
And if you really look at it, those are what our mosques are supposed to be,
Yeah.
or our community centers.
Yeah.
There needs to be this holistic development that you talk about.
Yes.
Right? As we know, you were saying, children are the breadwinners of the home.
Yeah.
They have to look after the home because of our social issues.
Yeah.
There's been HIV, there's been broken families, and so unemployment becomes a big issue. How do we create entrepreneurial opportunities? I mean, I know you are an entrepreneur, so you've broken away from, I would guess, a poverty-stricken area,
Yeah.
and been able to be now more fortunate and now being, giving back.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that obviously you replicating your trajectory,
Yeah.
and now giving back, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
And then through that, others can come out, and there'll be other Rahim Komanis, inshallah.
Inshallah. Better
Right.
than Rahim.
Of course,
Inshallah.
of course. I mean, that's the whole idea, right?
Yeah,
We want to leave a better life for our next generation.
Yes.
So just in terms of some of the practical interventions that you're doing there.
Yeah.
And also the history of it, how long has it been operating and so on?
Yeah, yeah. No, basically on the side of the community work, I've been in the community working space for the past 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah, right? So from the time I was about 18, that's when I started.
You're just giving your
Community
age away as well. But
Yeah, it's fine. No, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah, I'm under 30.
Okay.
So
you're still a millennial, right?
yeah. So I've been in the community work for like 10 years or so, but it was started by my mother in another where we used to where I grew up. It was a community center. My house was a community center. So I don't have a history where we said as a family we have supper or lunch or I don't know. My mother would call everybody. Everybody would always be there, from breakfast all the way to supper. I mean, after school, everybody's playing there. So it was a whole community center where I grew up, right? So I grew up within that space where others were helped within where I was growing up. Then after that, now when I grew up, we built another new facility, alhamdulillah. It's a masjid. It has all your community development programs there. We have your agriculture program there. We have computers there. We have sewing there. We have social workers there, So, but it's been 2 years now we've been operating. But what I'm saying is that when I looked into the element of da'wah, we, alhamdulillah, we've studied Islam, then we were told, Udu'u ila sabil rabbika bil hikmah, go and give them da'wah with wisdom. Wal mau'idat al-hasan. Now, when I tried to, do the work, and I found out that there's one common enemy, and that is poverty. That is one common enemy. Out of everything, whether you find a person who will be selling substance that is not allowed to be sold in a country, you reverse back the issue, it leads you to poverty. Whether a person is a prostitute, you reverse back, it leads you to that. Criminals, reverse back, it leads you to the same thing, poverty. That is our biggest enemy. That's why Ali bin Abi Talib, radiallahu anhu, said, if poverty was a man, I would kill him. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that poverty leads you to kufr. Which I think that, this is something that we need to fight more than anything. If you want a stable country, if you want a stable community, you want to start preaching moral values and all of that, address the issue of poverty. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam demonstrated it practically, how to address issues of poverty. If you look at the seerah on the side of community development aspect, you will see that the economy of Medina was booming, and it concurrently also collapsed the economy of Makkah.
Yes.
Right? But that Rasulullah demonstrated to us practically how do you take care of communities and you implement community development projects. So we're doing that, and now we're in the process of doing a boarding house where we're going to be housing 20 children. It's going to be a Quran and leadership academy. So we're going to teach them some of the leadership, lessons that we can learn from our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So practically, what I'm saying is that the issue here is poverty. If you address poverty, then you can be able to talk to people at the balanced level. Because currently no one is going to listen to you because everybody's chasing the stomach. They need to sort out the stomach.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, you were speaking about this neoliberalism, Rashad, just before the break.
Yeah.
And if you listen to what Brother Rahim is talking about, which if you take the socio-economic paradigm that we are saying we can usher in, this new thinking, it has to be driven from that poverty alleviation.
Yeah.
And the community, which happens to be the have-nots of this world, it has to be driven from them, right? Whereas the neoliberalism economic system, in many ways, has created, yes, definitely technological advancements through the fourth industrial revolution that you talk about, but in many ways has created this gap between the haves and the have-nots. And so you have people that remain in poverty. So in terms of that, how do you see, I mean, this is a practical example of socio-economic development in practice, but how do we impact, for example, the leaders of our society, politically, business, to be able to think in this practical way, that we put our poverty-stricken people at the center of development. And then through that, you know, we build a more abundant life.
Look, I think the key to doing that, firstly, for me, would be to include youth in those discussions. I think the importance of including people who are in touch with communities, who are doing community-based activism, community-based outreach, is that everyone has a voice. It's about amplifying certain voices. An imperialist global political social order often silences some voices in favor of others. And I think part of this, the word inclusion is often thrown around, but when I speak of inclusion and inclusive economic system, it's one where youth aren't the recipients of an economic policy, but they're part and parcel of creating that policy. People from communities that experience abject poverty need to have a say in how the economy of their community should be carried out. And I think including youth in those pivotal discussions, giving youth a meaningful and a substantive seat at the table where those decisions are made, for me would be a step in the right direction. But I think it's not a kind of a simple solution in terms of alleviating poverty anywhere in the world. I think that there needs to be a nuanced approach to it, and part of that is the private sector. I think as much as the government needs to invite people to their table when they're developing economic policy, the private sector needs to come to the part, and they need to be inclusive. And when I talk about inclusivity with regard to the private sector, I think the private sector needs to firstly acknowledge that there's a great imbalance based on racial and gender dynamics in particular, and class dynamics in South Africa that everyone is aware of. And then look at substantive ways of addressing those imbalances, addressing the racial imbalance, addressing the gender imbalance, addressing the class imbalance. And I think if the private sector along with the government can prioritize the agenda of youth employment, youth empowerment, then the problem of poverty, we can take a step towards alleviating it. And I think it's those small steps that eventually create a system where people's dignity is restored and people could live fulfilling and meaningful lives and not be burdened by the economic noose of capitalism that kind of limits humans' full expression.
You know, I'm hearing you say inclusivity. The president has also been speaking a lot around this inclusiveness, inclusivity, you know, bringing private sector. We also understand our fiscus is not as vibrant as what it was, so we need to bring in multiple stakeholders. Civic organizations become very important also in terms of this creating this new development. Here is already an undertaking that's been done by yourselves in your own personal capacity, I guess. What I need to understand as well is how has this been funded? Have you brought in government? Have you been sitting on the table with key government stakeholders, private sector stakeholders, in terms of this model and how we can replicate this at maybe other communities?
Okay, you know, before you invite others, it has first, you have to start first, you know, like it has to make sense to you, it has to be something that you can calculate, it has to be something that you can explain. So what we do is we prototype whatever ideas we have in place, and then when they succeed, then we can only present it to the public and say, listen, this is what is working now. That's why I said, I don't really like talking about the whole ideas and whatever. I believe that whoever came up with the separation between knowledge and action really did a good job. Because today we have conferences on poverty. Billions are spent on conferences of poverty, and yet not even a cent goes there. If they could buy a couple of groceries, it might cover a portion of it. Then you have a lot of ideas around how we can develop communities and whatnot. It's a very good thing to talk about it, but now the question is, when are we starting? When are we actually doing? Because our elders in Islam have always told us that action purifies the knowledge. You sit with me and say you are a professor in economics, and yet we're facing economic crisis now and then. It somehow questions. We had a crisis of COVID. Who were the people we were looking at? We were looking at the doctors to help us solve this problem, And then Professor Salim had it very well, mashallah. So we're talking about community development. We have conferences about community development. We have conferences about poverty. We analyze it and we talk about it. But when is the action taking place? We have the Millennium Development Goal with the United Nations. We have all of that with UNICEF and all. But the action part is what is missing. And I think we need to now reverse back to how can we act now? And everybody must act, There shouldn't be a couple of people who are sitting on the bench and they're analyzing everything that is happening. And there'll be others who are trying to do. They say those who have ideas don't have resources, and those who have resources lack ideas, practical ideas, right? So what led us to be in this way, like try and implement projects that will benefit our communities, is that we saw that there's something wrong, whether it's a system or as he was putting it, is the capitalist system. Something is not right. There is something somewhere. This is a structural poverty. It's engineered. It doesn't just come. It's not a disaster like COVID or how. Look at the concentration, the energy and the resources that were put on a temporary problem that we've had. But look at the same energy, how is it applied towards poverty alleviation?
And just on that note, we've come to the break. Immediately after the break, let's talk about this year around the action orientation toward dealing with poverty. Here's a practical example that's been done by the Winterveld Jama under Rahim Kumani and his community. And let's get down to some key actionable items that we can share with yourselves in terms of how to maybe replicate this in other communities.
Inshallah.
Immediately after the break.
Okay.
Welcome back to this third segment of Inspirate. Really insightful, inspirational conversation we've been having with Rashad Yusuf Dadu as well as Sheikh Rahim Kumani. And we spoke about the structural reforms just before the break, or what is required in terms of reform. Rahim, you mentioned that one of probably the drivers for this model that you've created in this community of Winterveld has been, as Rashad was talking about, the problem with this economic system that we've all been faced with for centuries. This that has created, yes, a lot of, one may argue, has taken humanity also out of poverty in some way, but at the same time has created this huge polarization, race polarization. We've seen the issues in the Northern Hemisphere with the Black Lives Matter. I mean, in the most developed country in the world, so-called, you're still having this issue with race, this have and have-nots. And it happens to be that brown and black people are still impoverished the world over. And you have started a program in the Winterveld area, 10 years now running, and where you've seen this as the challenge, that's been your driver, and now creating this holistic program. So what we need to be doing is looking at how we can replicate this, but you've also mentioned that it is important to first prototype something. And importantly, the word action. Action. So in terms of that action, I'll start with you, Rashad. Maybe what are some of the key actionable items, right? And to limit this this gap, this delta between intellectualizing and doing. And I think there's too much of that, which you mentioned. Too much of, we in South Africa have some of the best policies in the world, but then we still have this gap. So what are the actionable items that the youth need? The youth have the zest, right, and want to see change. I know you've challenged me many times as well. So what are those actionable interventions that need to take place that we can have the highest levers of impact?
I think for some sort of substantive change to occur, for it to not be just lip service, just policy, just discussion, just theory, there firstly requires a sense of will. I think there needs to be a sense of political will from those in power to actually bring about change. Without that will, it's discussions, it's, as you mentioned, another conference. And I think with regard to like youth issues, we could perhaps say that there isn't that sufficient amount of will. I mean, we have the National Youth Development Agency. Have they sufficiently addressed issues pertaining to the youth of South Africa? And I think those issues are many, and those issues are not the most complex. We talk about this move to a technology-centered way of learning, for example, at university, which we have to approach with great caution, because we cannot take it for granted that everyone firstly has a conducive home environment to work within. Secondly, do people have resources in that home environment to actually engage in an online learning platform? So I think when we're looking at these new ways of adjusting to the COVID-19 pandemic and the struggles facing youth, we need to look at it with a broader sort of sociological understanding of the lived experience. There was a discussion earlier on child-headed households. If someone has the responsibility to feed a younger brother or a younger sister at the age of 16, do they have enough time and energy to put into their studies? If people don't have access to a sufficient internet connection, can they submit their assignments on time? And I think these issues around resources, issues around access to educational aids, issues around general resources in a home environment, a conducive environment for young people to learn and to grow. If we can address those, then perhaps things like employability, skills development programs that empower people can be better looked at. And I think that for me it would come down to a question of will. Is there a willingness to see substantive change? And if there isn't a willingness, then we'll have more policies, we'll have more programs without any substance behind them.
At the same time, I may argue and say that I would like to believe that our political leaders, our business leaders have the will to want to see a better life for our people. At the same time, there's this economic system that's also built against really taking the have-nots out of their plight. As we spoke earlier, the system is built for those that are resourced to be able to just get more. And then it's initiatives like what you've undertaken, Rahim, which then says that despite all this gloom and doom and this reality that's perpetuated for all the years, there has to be a change, and a practical change. The time for talk is over.
Yeah.
And everybody getting down to whatever minimal resources they have, making changes, small impacts.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm hearing from what you've undertaken in Winterveld.
Yeah.
Now, just in terms of maybe your bigger vision.
Yes.
Right. I can just see it if in a perfect world, if there were many Winterveld Jamaas all around Africa. Surely you wouldn't have poverty then.
We would try and flatten the curve of poverty.
Yes.
Yeah, which is the discussion that we are supposed to be having now, flattening the curve of poverty.
Yes, that's the pandemic.
Yeah. That's the pandemic.
Yes.
It's the biggest disease is poverty. Now, what we intend to do in the future is that we have a plan of, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it a success.
Inshallah, amin.
5 years ago, if you come and ask me that, how you want to complete this center, I wouldn't know, We've started with a little less than 100 on the foundation, and we didn't know where the rest is going to be. And today, alhamdulillah, the center is worth a couple of millions, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
You know, so I don't know where we're going to get the resources. Allah knows, because what we believe and what we know is that once you start, Allah sends His people to assist, you know. So now our plan is to build at least 45 centers. 2 is already done, alhamdulillah.
Where's the other one?
The other one, we have 2 in Winterfell.
Okay,
Yeah,
all
yeah,
right.
2 is already done in Winterfell. So we want to build about 45.
Across the country?
Yeah, across the country, all provinces. Now, what's the plan with that? They're going to be organs of development, lighthouses of development. Because we believe, Allah says, وَأَنَّ الْمَسَاجِدَ لِلَّهِ. Masjid is for Allah.
Yes.
And we saw historically with the Masjid Nabawi that there's a whole lot of activities that were happening there. It was not only prayer.
It was a center for learning.
It was a center for learning. It was a
Yes.
center for training. It was a center for cure, hospitals,
Yes, yes.
culture, all of that. So we want to replicate that, to the rest of the country and show the country what Islam has to offer in terms of community development. Looking at the ideologies that you've just mentioned, when you look at capitalism, there was always reactionary ideologies such as socialism. And then socialism, so this is not, and then communism came. And then, they all patched around and said, no, we are better than. So the system today, it's not absolute. It's under construction always.
Yes.
You look at the markets, how they recovered the markets in the past and how they're recovering the markets now. It's different models they use. So we cannot just say that, the system is built like that. The system is built like that, but it can be amended. It can be redirected to where we want it to be.
Of course.
Particularly as the Muslim community, because we have the Quran. It tells us everything. Let me put an example like this. If we had, I'm talking from our space now, as the Muslims. If we had the Muslim community prioritize their spending, before they walk into Diamond Walk,
Yeah.
before we walk into
we
Diamond
all
Walk,
love Diamond Walk.
we start by saying that a portion of whatever I'm making has to go towards lifting the flag of Islam. And you're not going to lift the flag of Islam just because you talk nice, just because you got good verses of the Quran, just because you can quote the Bible and contradict this and that. Forget about that. Now, da'wah has to be holistic. You have to show and demonstrate, because that's what people believe in now. Through our work and compared to the work of doing the book handouts, and mashallah, it's very good. But through our work, our holistic approach, we are able to attract more towards the deen than actual one-on-one with people, because they are able to see what we are saying. They say action is a measure of true intelligence. You can say whatever you want to say on a podium, but if it's not on the ground, forget about it. So we want to put out those centers whereby they will have skill center, they will have a worshiping facility, they will have Quran and leadership academies. Currently now we're doing both for boys and girls. We are busy with that. So we'll have Quran leadership academies, we'll have agricultural spaces, but all of that depends on the area in which we are in. Like, for an example, why we went with the agricultural project in Winterfell is because Winterfell is the basket, or was the basket. There's about 1,411 farms which are not really working. So having an agricultural type of program there, it will be.
So I guess if you were doing a program, for example, in a place like Burgersford, the natural resource there would be, say, chrome so then you use that natural wealth of that area.
We will concentrate on services or skills that are needed on that.
Right.
So different areas have different dynamics, of course. You cannot apply one solution for everyone. It doesn't work like that. It's not a one size fits all. So we want to build those centers around the country. At least if we can have 1 million youth that are serviced from those centers, that is an impact.
And I mean, what they say is, if you impact 1 million people, you can times that, especially in Africa, with the large youth population, which I know Bill Gates, when he came to speak in Tanzania, he was talking about that the greatest asset of Africa is our youth.
Yes.
So that 1 million impact at least 5 people.
Yeah.
So you've literally impacted 5 million people.
Yes.
Right, and households.
Yes.
Right, in terms of taking them out of poverty in a practical, actionable way.
Yes. That's what will work. For now, we are in this country that has good policies, one of the best in the world. But when it comes to implementation, there's a bit of problem, because you know what, at the end of it all, you can talk however you want, but people judge on what they see.
Yes.
You know, what we see is how we interpret things. What I see, I can be able to explain to you, you know what, this is really happening or it's not happening. You know, so we need to really prioritize as Muslims, as a Muslim community, that before we go to Diamond Walk, before we start having the fear, you know, there was this fear that the markets are crashing, you know, I need to move my money out of the country, and all. Everybody was talking about moving their money out. Everybody is afraid of poverty when Allah tells you do not kill your children in fear of poverty in the Quran. Yeah. So what happened to the tawakkal aspect? Maybe.
Yes.
We need to question each other about that. So what I'm saying is that priority is we need to take the resources back to the community to enable the community and trigger development in our communities. As Muslim communities, we can do it. In our way, we can definitely do it.
Okay, before we get to the last segment, which is just after the break, I want to be able to take what Brother Rahim, Brother Rashad has been speaking about, and leave us with hope. I think you said tawakkul. This yaqeen, this faith. This is what our Islam has taught us.
Yeah.
And what we're supposed to be living. Not this doom and gloom. And you've done it in a practical way. And let's explore this after the break, in the last segment.
Sure.
Back to this last segment of Inspirate, and we've been having this most thought-provoking, insightful conversation with the brothers Rashad Dadu, social student activist, as well as Rahim Nkomani, businessman and philanthropist. Just before the break, you know, we were talking around this model that's replicatable with the intention around 45 places around the country. Started in Winterfell, there's 2 centers there, and very much modeled around our beloved Prophet ﷺ and what he created in Medina Munawwara. A place where, at the time, just like today, structurally, all the odds were against him. A system that was built for, again, this tribalism, a few that were enriching themselves at the expense of many. And we're faced with that same reality today. Yet, because of this gift as Muslims, the beautiful Quran and the ethos of Islam that has been shown to us to be able to take people out of poverty. The Prophet chose poverty. He chose. He could have chosen to be operating with just the rich, but he didn't, because that's what we were speaking about around poverty alleviation and putting the poor at the center of development. I did read somewhere about this revolution that the Prophet undertook, and different from any other revolution. Other revolutions had a political or social or economic stance. This was a holistic revolution. Every facet of society was changed. And this is what we're trying to achieve at Winterfell. So just in terms of that, and we're obviously at the last segment, and we want to leave our viewers with some sort of hope that wherever their situation is, they may be sitting in poverty right now, they may be broken families, but what is that hope? So with regards to that, if I were to throw a crystal ball to you, Rashad, and let's say 5 years from now, right, how do you see the world? You know, we're always at the crossroads, but how do you see the world for the youth especially?
You know, inshallah, I'd like to believe in a better world. I think being an activist is being able to envision a better world than the current one we're living in. So, you know, God willing, 5 years' time, things will be better. But I think, I mean, as a sort of parting message, I think the point of resilience, and I think as Muslims, as South Africans, as young people, as people of a greater community, we have a duty. And I think until we see it as a duty, until we see the fight against poverty, the fight against racism, the fight against sexism, the fight against all of these social evils that subjugate people and place people on the margins of society, until we take on those struggles as a duty, I think that the rate of change will unfortunately be limited. So inshallah, as communities in our limited capacities, and people have various capacities, people have financial restraints, family restraints, even maybe emotional or physical restraints. And I think that within that limited capacity that we each have, as Sheikh Rahim is doing in his capacity, I think if we can all adopt that type of agenda to our lives and we can turn that into a duty, then inshallah in the next 5 years we can have another discussion like this on how prosperous the youth community in South Africa is doing, how the pandemic of poverty, as it was so nicely put, has come to an end or is on the losing side. And I think that requires us as Muslims, as young people, people of consciousness, to take it on as a duty and nothing less than a duty. So that's my prayer for the South African community,
Inshallah.
for the South African society, for us as young people.
Inshallah.
If I passed that ball over to you, Brother Rahim,
Yeah.
You're practically doing stuff.
Yeah.
You did share with us your vision.
Yeah.
But yes, in general, as South Africans, as people of the continent,
Yeah.
as people of the world,
Yeah.
which we all facing the same realities.
Yeah.
This gap, this racial inequality that Brother Rashad was talking about. How do you see the world in 5 years' time?
I see the world being a better place in 5 years' time, but provided that we have, some achievements that we would like to see in 5 years and reverse it back to where we are now. Because having a vision, it's not, you have to have practical steps to go there. And one of the basic need for those steps to be taken is that there's a certain discipline that we need to observe. There's a certain change in thinking that we need to have, particularly as Muslims. Like, we need to have a particular direction that we take together, to fight poverty, ignorance, and disunity. These are the three biggest enemies that I see in this world. Now, Rasulullah ﷺ can only be our solution. One non-Muslim sociologist, he said something very interesting, which I want to clarify my point. He said that if greatness of purpose achieved through smallness of means is a sign of genius, then who can dare to compare men like Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? You understand? So this is the man that we say he is Rasulullah.
I think
And
for the
when we
sake of the
follow-
viewers, you need to repeat that quote. Yeah.
He said if greatness of purpose
Yes.
achieved through smallness of means is a sign of genius, then who can dare to compare men like Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he is our model. Ati'u Allah wa ati'u Rasul. So as Muslims, I think we have a best model, better than anyone in the world. I'm not saying better in terms of like showing off, but it's true. We have a best model who practically demonstrated community development to us. All we need to do is to just follow. We'll cut and paste here and there. I see Muslims, mashallah, we're cutting and pasting. But we have a model already, a holistic model towards community development. And you can plug it into any society, whether it's a communist society, whether it's a capitalist society, whatever society that you find yourself in, you can plug the model and it can work.
And its relevancy to
Very
every
relevant.
time. I mean,
Relevant.
even using like you said, you're using the technological advancements of the
Yes,
world,
yes.
but using the principles.
The principles and
Yes.
the foundations of the Quran and Sunnah. You can always work around a very developmental model for our society. So in 5 years' time, I see more people becoming creative in their business spaces and employing more people. I see particularly Muslims. I see more Muslims going less to the diamond walk and going more to the townships and doing some work practically. I see more of our organizations doing actual work, practical actual work, rather than only reporting and doing some pamphlets. I'm sorry I'm being a bit direct,
No,
but
that's-
this is the truth, because when you move around spaces that people are saying they are working and you don't see work, you must be concerned as a human being, And this is only the purpose of triggering others to start doing the actual work that they are claiming to be doing. That's it. So the business community also, You know, we cannot stay long in our boardrooms and our CEO executive offices, you know. It's time for the work now. It's time for us to work because we are here on a journey. We are passing by. You know, kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut. We all die. So rather we focus on legacy-driven projects that will impact other people's lives than the small anyana competition we have amongst each other. So who's got the deepest pockets than the other. You
It's
know,
about
we focus
working
on,
together.
It's about working together and focusing on actuals and focusing on impact-driven projects. You know, impact-driven projects. Then we will, in 5 years' time, definitely, we would be in a better space.
You know, you say about work and making impact.
Yeah.
And I said, if one thing COVID did, it brought us to our knees and brought us into the ground.
Yeah.
Right, to be able to rebuild.
Yeah.
And that's what it's about, right? It's all this intellectualizing. The time is over.
Yeah.
Yes, you will strategize and think. It's important. Strategy is important, but strategy without implementation in that iterative model, you lose the impact.
Yeah.
And so it's about bringing us back to earth, which is what you're doing at Winterfeld, and using the natural resources to build from there, the communities. You know, economists talk about green shoots. You literally building those green shoots, growing those green shoots.
I mean, even Rasulullah SAW told us in a hadith that if you hear that qiyamah is on the corner and you have a seed in your hand, you plant it.
You plant it, yes.
This is, look at that. Community development all the way. Whether you hear there's a disaster or don't worry about that. We plant. We do what we can where we are with what we have.
Alhamdulillah.
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 So we'll be at the better space, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Yeah.
So in terms of what we've heard from the brothers, we're talking about practical interventions, saying that what COVID has done, COVID has come in, has shown us, maybe acted as a mirror for us. I don't think these problems were not there. Maybe we as society were immune to it because we were so caught up in our diamond walks.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the COVID has come in and shown us now this glaring inequality, the glaring poverty, children that are suffering because parents that have passed on because of societal, structural issues. Yet, the Prophet ﷺ has been our greatest example. That's what's come out very strongly here and replicated through this model in the Winterfeld Jama'ah by Brother Rahim Komani and the community there, and wanting to replicate it all across the country, inshallah, across the continent.
Inshallah.
Right, and using the principles, that of just not being naysayers, not being feeling doom and gloom and being depressed, but being able to do whatever you can with what little means you have.
Where you are.
Where you are, right where you are. And being able to make some sort of practical intervention, whatever you can, in terms of making your life a better life for yourself, for your family, and for your community and the world at large. On that light, I say thank you from the Inspirate team in our collaboration with our partners, the Movement for a United South Africa, and we hope to see you for many other shows as we continue the socio-economic paradigm discussion. Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah.
Jazakallah.